evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history and the authors that have written about them. Rebecca Salcedo had an easy smile, a sexy body, and strong appetites. She wanted the world. Bruce Cleland, she decided, would buy it for her. The shy engineer quickly fell victim to her charms, getting her whatever she wanted, a new car, a boat, a house. But he wasn't Rebecca's only admirer. Even after Rebecca manipulated Bruce into marrying her, hoping to divorce him and take him for everything he had, she occupied herself with a series of lovers, male strippers, women. They all spent time in Rebecca's bed, but when she learned that a divorce would only get her a few pennies, she knew she had to find another way to secure Bruce's fortune. The book tonight that featured is Honeymoon with a Killer. He loved her. She loved his money. A return guest, Don Lasseter, my very special guest. Don Lasseter, Honeymoon with a Killer. Welcome back to the program, Don Lasseter.
Thank you, Dan. It's nice to be back with you again.
Thank you very much for agreeing to this interview. And a great book, by the way, Honeymoon with a Killer. My favorite question, I think, because I always ask it, is very curious, why did you decide to write about Rebecca Salcedo and this case specifically?
Well, it's kind of an interesting cultural story to that I did not include in the book. But when my collaborator, my co-author, and I, Ron Bowers, and I were considering this story, I was looking at it and I was wondering really what sounded so familiar about it. And suddenly it hit me that it's a retelling of the opera Carmen, Bizet's opera. In that, and I when I was a kid, I saw a version of that with Rita Hayworth and Glenn Ford. So I'm picturing Rita Hayworth as Rebecca, and in Carmen, this woman is a beautiful, tempestuous, fiery gypsy in Spain who's selling her wares in a town plaza, and she meets an innocent, inexperienced soldier, Don Jose. He falls hopelessly in love, but she's unfaithful with a bullfighter. Their affair wrecks his life and ends in deadly tragedy. Rebecca meets Bruce while selling spices at a swap meet, captures his heart, is unfaithful with male strippers. So and their relationship wrecks his life, which ends in deadly tragedy. So this is Carmen, only without the magnificent music, the March of the Toreadors, and the beautiful habanera.
Wow, incredible.
That's what got me hooked on it.
Well, it's a great story. It has all those elements for sure. Now, you mentioned Ronald E. Bowers. He's listed on the cover as Don Lasseter, the author, with Ronald E. Bowers. So tell us what is his role in the writing of this book?
Ron is a 40-year veteran of the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, and he's been involved in in prosecution of every major crime in that 40 years, including all the ones you've heard about over the years. And so Ron has just a wealth of experience. So we became acquainted several years ago, and Ron just pretty much helps me with the research. He writes some of the things too as well. One book we quoted quite a bit of his writing. We didn't do that in Honeymoon because I wanted to take a little different type of voice on this one. But Ron is just a wealth of information for me.
Great. Now, for our audience, where does this story primarily take place, and in what era? What time are we talking about? What years?
It took place in the mid '80s. And right here in Southern California, Rebecca met Bruce at the old La Mirada Drive-In Theater, which is now a swap meet in Orange County.
Right. Now, we're talking about Rebecca Salcedo, and it's an incredible story, her character. Let's start with her history. Where was she raised? What kind of upbringing did she have? Tell us about Rebecca Salcedo.
Rebecca is one of the most complex, multifaceted women I've ever encountered in research. Her friends called her beautiful, fun, sexy, outrageous, generous, affectionate, and others saw her as duplicitous, self-centered, greedy, and evil. Rebecca was born here in Los Angeles of Hispanic immigrants. And her mother was raped and produced the first daughter, Rebecca's older sister, as a result of that rape in Tijuana. and then moved up here, and that man deserted her, and she was married again, and that marriage didn't last forever. So Rebecca grew up in pretty much a dysfunctional family with a lot of strain on the household. She and her sisters didn't get along well. Her mother was a nurse, worked as a nurse, but was hooked on prescription drugs and spent a lot of time in her bedroom while the sisters pretty much ran the house. So it wasn't a happy childhood, and I don't know if we can use that as the abuse excuse or not, as many criminals who say they grew up in a poor environment.
Now, one thing you haven't talked about is her upbringing, but what did she develop into? What type of character? She obviously was an attractive woman. You can see that in the cover on the book. But what did she realize? If she didn't realize too many things, and what did she realize early on, and how did that affect her character development?
Well, her good looks and her incredible body became her path to existence, to wealth. She learned soon, at the age of about 12 or 13, when she grew into a woman's body, that men would give her just about anything she wanted if she behaved in certain ways, and she did. And she had no trouble at all displaying those ways. But she also developed a gregarious personality that attracted not only men but women, and I mean men and women in any way you want to imagine. She saw that she could get just about anything she wanted. One man even let her drive a Lamborghini that he owned, and no one knows what she was doing for that. She learned really early to use her female wiles and her figure to get what she wanted. She was, by the way, she was once married, but only to provide an immigrant with a green card, and she treated that marriage as no more important than a yard sale transaction. Right.
And she also, at an early age, looked much, much older than her age as well, which
she did,
which helped or didn't help in a particular case. And so, what was she doing, say, after her teenage life? At what age would we find her previous to, and we'll get into right away talking about one of the other characters, Bruce Cleland. But let's talk about, say, her at 20 years old. Where was she at in her life? What was she doing? What was her occupation? Was she going to school? Tell us what she was actually doing at that time.
Well, let's back up a little further. She at about 13 or 14, she was going to a makeup school, so she could because she didn't do well at that year in school, and that's where she met her best friend. It looks like Bertha when you read it, but it's pronounced Berta, and Bertha is a prominent character in our book here.
Right.
Then, as they grew into they became friends, and then Rebecca was very involved with a lot of men, and she produced a young boy, a son, and she didn't know who the father was exactly. And she found out while she was in jail, actually in prison for a drug conviction. And she contacted her friend Bertha. I'm going to call her Bertha. I'm not going to try that better the whole way.
Okay.
So she contacted Bertha and said, "Could you send me some pictures of the men I've been dating, so I'll try to figure out which one is the father." So that gives you a pretty capsulized picture of what Rebecca really was.
Right. Now you talk about this Bertha. She's important to the story because she's with her at an early age, and this is conceivably the very best friend, the person that knows her the best, and we'll say her very, very closest friend. So that's why she's very important to this story, isn't she?
Exactly, that's correct. Bertha was extremely intelligent, bright, articulate, also a Hispanic heritage, but she had a level head, and that's what Bertha said she felt like was attractive to Rebecca, that she sort of kept her on the straight and narrow as much as she could.
Now, what was the relationship with Rebecca and her other sisters? Dolores, one of her sisters, is a primary figure in this story as well. Tell us a little bit about the relationship with her other siblings.
Well, it was a terribly fractious relationship, and Bertha explained to me that the girls were just constantly at each other's throats. They slept with each other's boyfriends just to make the other one jealous. They were in constant competition with one another. No peace, no serenity in that household at all, just warfare.
Wow. And so, again, now that we've caught up a little bit, as time goes on, what is her goals in life? I know you say she's easily can manipulate men to get whatever she wants. What is her goals in life? What is her occupation? What does she believe she wants to do with her life?
Well, I don't think she ever had any real goals. She was a day-to-day existence. She had a few minor jobs, and Bertha got her a few jobs. One of them was at a company where Bertha was doing white-collar work, and she got Rebecca a job as some helper. But Rebecca thought she would use her lovely figure to enchant the boss, stepped out of a restroom with her blouse open, and as Bertha explained, everything popped out. And the boss was just absolutely furious and said, "Get her out of here," and she got fired from that one. So I don't think she had many goals as far as profession. When she met Bruce, she was working at a company that made spices and bottled them in interesting rectangular-shaped jars. And Rebecca managed to smuggle a few of those from her employer and take them to that swap meet and sell them there for a little extra profit. And that's where she met Bruce.
So she was hustling at that point.
Right.
Now, tell us about Bruce Cleland. You call the chapter, and I don't know if this is your idea, but I would think it might be, that the evolution of a male virgin, and you can tell me why you titled it that. But what was his background? What was his family life of Bruce Cleland?
Bruce grew up in an upper middle class home in South Pasadena. Just very nice, down to earth, salt of the earth people with a fair amount of wealth. One older sister, and but Bruce unfortunately didn't have. He wasn't born with good looks. I pointed out that if anyone remembers the funny character in the old Laugh-In series called Tiny Tim,
right?
Yes, Tiny Tim. Unfortunately, poor Bruce in high school, bore quite a resemblance to Tiny Tim.
Oh, geez.
It made him extremely self-conscious about his looks, so he became afraid to approach girls at all. They pretty much shunned him, ignored him, laughed at him. So he concentrated on academics. He was a very, very bright kid. Straight A's, was a 4-year member of the group of kids who achieve all the high grades. He got a scholarship to college and eventually graduated with a master's degree from Stanford University in computer software engineer.
Right. Right. Now, you say the evolution of a male virgin. You're saying he's shy. Now he goes to college. I guess his life changes. Does he outgrow any of this sort of nerdy looks, or how does his life continue?
Well, actually, he did evolve to a fairly decent-looking man, but I don't think he understood that. And by the time he reached age 42, when he met Rebecca, he still hadn't had any experience with women at all.
Wow.
He became extremely frugal during those years, working up in Silicon Valley for computer firms and doing international work, actually undercover work across the various continents for the government. But Bruce became extremely frugal, invested all of his money, and had accrued quite a bit of wealth by the time he was 42. His best pal was his father, and his father and he went to ball games together and did other things together, including driving from South Pasadena a few times to visit the swap meet down in Orange County.
Now, he even lived with his parents still at that age, didn't he?
That's correct. Well, no, not at that age. He had moved up to Silicon Valley and then had a place in Hermosa Beach down by the beach here. And that's amazing, too, because any man who can't meet a woman in Hermosa Beach is not doing very well for himself.
He's not trying too hard, anyway. Yeah.
No.
Okay, so he accumulates an incredible wealth. You say he's likely a virgin. He has virtually no experience with any women at all. And how? Describe the day that Bruce Cleland meets. Again, he's with his father that day, isn't he? And tell us about the meeting and what exactly happened and how it all came to be that these two people would meet.
Well, Bruce and his father are strolling along in this colorful swap meet, which just every kind of vendor in there at all. I think I said from tortillas to tires in there. Colorful Mexican flags, music playing in the background. A very, very interesting place to visit. Ron and I went over and strolled through there just to see what the ambiance of it was. Bruce and his father are strolling along, and he spots this rather attractive, voluptuous woman selling spices from interesting jars, and something struck Bruce hard. Just something like, I guess, Cupid shot him with an arrow at that point.
Right.
He told his father and surprised his father immensely by saying, I'm going to go back and talk to that girl. His father was gobsmacked and just stood and looked at with big eyes, and Bruce actually went back and started a conversation with Rebecca, and she saw dollar signs.
Sure.
And so they talked for a while, and it later turned out that she was trying to find out as much as she could about him, because in the company where she worked, she had access to credit records. And when she told some of her friends the next day, I've met the man I'm going to marry, and let me show you something, they thought she was going to show a picture. Instead, she pulls out his credit report.
Wow. What did she... well, before I go that, what did Bruce's family think of Rebecca, and or just the idea that he met this woman? What did he say to his father? Did he say, "Listen, I got her number," or I've set up a date"? What was that conversation with his father about that meeting with Rebecca?
I don't think they had much of a conversation, but his father was, absolutely amazed and rather pleased to see his son flirting, trying to set up a date with a woman. And even though the father strongly suspected that Rebecca wasn't exactly the type of woman he would like to see his son get involved with, he still was pleased that something was happening. So they were, and when he went home and told his wife, Bruce's mother, they were pretty pleased to see something with some possible future for their son.
Now, you talked about her going to her coworkers and showing the credit report as opposed to showing a photo of the man. So she said this is the man she's going to marry. Other than those people at work, did she have a conversation with her sister about Bruce, or with Bertha? Did she have conversations with them immediately after meeting Bruce?
Both, yeah, her sister and Bertha, and she said, this is the man I'm going to marry, but she also added, I'm going to take him for everything he's worth, and I'm going to be set for life. And that showed pretty much the type of woman she was. This was not a sudden falling in love by her. If Bruce was in love, that was one thing. She was not in love. She was in greed.
Now, what did her friend Bertha say, and what did her sister say in response to? I mean, obviously she's manipulated men for all kinds of things, but to have that kind of, I'm going to take everything that he's worth, and also I'm going to marry this man. What was Dolores' response, her sister, and what was Bertha's response to that?
Well, both of them were pretty skeptical and pretty rather appalled. They thought, well, that's not a very good way to approach this idea of meeting a man. You only want his money, but Rebecca was pretty persistent and said, that's what I'm after, and that's what I want, and I want to be set for life, and I'll marry him, and he'll get me anything I want. And as it turned out, I told you that Bruce was quite a frugal character.
Right.
A miracle happened. He made a complete about-face, a 180-degree turn, and started buying her things, being extremely generous with her. She lived in a small, very small house in a rough neighborhood, and he went in and bought new furniture for her and her little boy. She wanted a hot tub. He bought that for her. He bought her a boat and a trailer to go with it. And he stunned his parents and his sister, who was married by then, and his brother-in-law. And this was his whole circle of social circle were his parents and his sister and her brother-in-law, and they were just absolutely amazed at what happened to him. And while they were skeptical about it, they still felt good that he was changing and that he might have a woman in his life.
So, despite he had enough money, he certainly could do whatever he wanted. Overall, it looked like Bruce was enjoying himself, that he wasn't the happiest-go-lucky guy in the whole world despite all of his financial success and business success. They saw a real change in him as a result of meeting Rebecca, and they were good with that because of that. Isn't that correct?
Good with that. They said, I heard that later he reports that he was in absolute heaven. His personality changed as well. He was happy and whistling and singing and looking forward to every moment he could be with Rebecca. That's what makes it so damn tragic, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what did Rebecca manage to convince Bruce to do in a short period of time? You talked about the boat, and I wanted to make sure the audience realizes, too, these weren't exactly ideas that Bruce came up with about the boat. This was from the prodding of Rebecca. I need this, I expect this, and at the same time, we've got to bear in mind that she did tell Bruce, drew some lines on terms of his idea of well, not romance, but maybe you can tell the audience what her rules were and what she expected and what she told him in terms of, in terms of her moral code.
Well, that's a very good point you make. A very good question. She had, obviously, as I've mentioned, she'd been very promiscuous before this. But
sure.
In this facade she's putting on for Bruce, she claims, well, women of my Hispanic origin don't just go to bed with anyone. And she said, I have one boy, and that's the only man I've ever been with, my little boy's father. And so, obviously, we're not going to have any intimate relations until we're married. And she kept driving that home. We must get married before. So that just we do not do anything naughty together. And Bruce bought it every inch of the way, where most men with any experience would have said, "Oh my God, this is not working here. This is not right."
And there was other things too as well, that he also made duplicates of his credit cards so she could use them basically at her whim. She also began. Of course, you mentioned that she's very generous. She's very generous with Bruce's credit cards to people, her entourage, we'll say, people in her family or people around her. That was something that, again, another reasonable person might wonder. And wasn't there also a stipulation that he really couldn't just pop over to her place at any time, or was that later when he actually bought the house for her?
Well, that's correct. He wasn't. He didn't even try to spend the nights with her at that, because he bought her story that she was very moral and wasn't going to allow any hanky-panky going on.
Right.
And then eventually they began to talk about marriage, and he decided he went to take her house shopping, and he bought a beautiful home for her in Whittier on a hilltop, magnificent home, and he bought that for her, and. Then she started angling. She wanted to get her hooks into the 50% ownership of that thing. So she said, well, we must be married in a church, of course, because her religion demanded a marriage in a church.
Sure.
But she wanted to be, she said, if we could just, maybe just go ahead and we should have a civil ceremony first before the church. And he fell right for that, and thinking, oh boy, now we can move in the house together. But even after the little civil service marriage, she moved into the house, but he wasn't allowed to. He still had to stay down with his parents in South Pasadena. And poor guy, most men reading this would say, "Wow, what a fool!" But it was poor Bruce. He had no experience with this, and so the poor guy was just gullible and love-struck. And I've written before in other books, it's funny what love can do to people.
Sure. At this time, you had just alluded to the brother-in-laws, Ed Brown and Theda and Harold Cleland. When it got to the point further along, and they were talking about marriage, and he bought the house for her, and he wasn't allowed to be over there, was there any suspicion from and anything expressed with Bruce's parents or the brother-in-law, Ed Brown? Was there anybody from his side of the family that said, listen, this could be very bad?
Well, two things happened. One, his brother-in-law, who understood what was going on here, did try to talk to Bruce and tell him, maybe you want to be cautious about this before you, plod forward with this woman. Also, one of Rebecca's sisters actually called Bruce's mother, Theda, and said, my sister is trying to take your son. for a lot of money, and she's not being very honest with him. And this shows the relationship between the sisters, that her own sis would do that.
Right.
But Bruce was having none of that. And the mother didn't even try to stop him. She thought, well, he's a grown man. He should be able to make his own choice. Oh, by the way, let me back up just a little bit. You mentioned the credit cards. Yes, she was buying a lot of things, not just for herself with his credit cards, but for her friends, including a male stripper that she'd been seeing sometime before that. And and when she moved into the new house, the male stripper paid quite a few visits there too. And Bruce even saw him there one time, and Rebecca casually explained, "Oh, this is just one of my cousins. He just came to visit me a little while." And poor Bruce even bought into that. So,
sure.
Some readers are going to begin to wonder, what is the matter with this man?
Yeah,
but he
right.
was gullible. He was into everything she was doing.
Now, wedding plans have been made, correct? And at a bridal show, Rebecca meets a photographer that becomes a very important figure in this story too, named Elizabeth Lamb. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about those wedding plans and about Elizabeth Lamb too.
You bet. In the book, readers will see I call Beth Lamb Elizabeth, because that's her real name. And writers sometimes, let me explain a little problem that writers have sometimes. It's interesting because it was really a struggle here. I had Beth, I had Bertha, and I had Becky. Becky is Rebecca's middle name, or nickname, I should say. And so I had to be very, very careful so that I didn't confuse readers. So I call Beth Lamb Elizabeth all the way through, and Bertha by Bertha, and then I refer to Rebecca all the way through as not Becky, so I don't confuse the readers. I thought that was a real problem for me. Anyway, Beth was a successful wedding photographer. She was a very cordial, humorous, lovely person. And when Rebecca contacted her, first Beth was a little skeptical because she went to the little house in the rough neighborhood and was wondering, well, do I really want to get into this? But Rebecca really wanted the first-class treatment all the way. She ordered the most expensive package that the photographer had available. So Beth said, well, okay, I'll go along with it. Rebecca, though, wanted to treat Beth like an intimate friend, like she really were very close to her.
Right.
Beth preferred to keep it on a courteous, professional level. Here I'll give an example of how that worked. Rebecca hosted a wild bachelorette party before the Catholic wedding, and I asked, when I was interviewing Beth, I said, did you attend? And she looked at me and she rolled her eyes. She said, not this Mormon, Mom.
Right,
So
right.
that gives you a little insight into what Beth was like. And she went to, they had the Catholic wedding at a very, very nice Catholic church. They had a magnificent reception later at a country club that, because of Bruce's parents, had the contacts up in the wealthy section of San Marino area. And it's interesting, the wedding was attended by several of Rebecca's relatives and friends and people she knew, but they didn't go to the reception because they didn't quite feel in the country club atmosphere wasn't theirs. So the reception was pretty much attended by the Cleland family and their acquaintances.
Now tell us, you talked about the bachelor party, and the bachelor party is very important because, like you say, Elizabeth Lamb said, I'm not going to show up, he says. But it also was because of some of the information that Rebecca told Elizabeth Lamb. Well, this is what's going to go on at this bachelor party, and it seemed way too raunchy for Elizabeth Lamb. But tell us about the bachelor party and who was there to witness what actually happened at that bachelor party.
Well, the bachelor party, as I said, was held at the new home that Bruce bought for her, but, of course, he wasn't going to be there. She invited, I think about 25 of her female friends, But when she told Beth Lamb what the entertainment was going to be, that certainly convinced the Mormon mom she was going to go, because she was going to have male strippers as well, including the one with whom she'd been having an affair. And the other women didn't mind, although Bertha, her best friend Bertha, did go, but she said, I left before the male strippers because by that time I was involved in a serious relationship, and I didn't want to be there for these male strippers. But she said, I went in to say goodbye to Rebecca before I left, and I couldn't find her. I went into the bedroom, and there she was in bed with one of the male strippers.
Sure. Probably innocent, though.
Oh, absolutely. Of course. They were just getting warm.
Now, you say there was that Bertha left. Who witnessed the thing? Who, if anyone, witnessed the entire thing to say what happened the next day? Did anyone stay the night? Tell us about that.
Quite a few of the women stayed the night because there was a free flow of much drink and much food. But one of the sisters also saw the event between the male stripper and her sister, and she kept that in her little memory bank to use in the future if she needed to. Right.
Now, the wedding takes place, and tell us about the wedding. Is it uneventful? Basically, you say that the reception is basically attended by the Cleland's family and friends rather than her family. So tell us a little about the wedding, if there was anything unusual, untoward there, or and just tell us about the reception and what happened at the reception itself.
Well, at the wedding in the church, the wedding photographer Beth, she said it was beautiful and everything was going well. But this introduces one other character that we need to know about.
Sure.
Rebecca's uncle Arturo was there. Now, Uncle Arturo had two sons, Rebecca's cousins, Alvaro and Jose, and Alvaro was there, but not Jose. But Uncle Arturo, who was a woman groper, every time he had a couple of drinks, Bertha complained many times that every time I'd be around him, he'd try to grapple me, so I told Rebecca, if he ever touches me like that again, I'm going to kick him where it hurts the most and tell him to keep his hands off of me. Rebecca said, oh, don't worry about it. He does that all to me all the time, too. He's just kidding around. He's just a funny guy. And the Mormon mom wedding photographer was there taking pictures, and she said my biggest problem was Uncle Arturo was all over me, trying to grope me, too.
Right,
and I told him, get your hands off and stay away from me. And then she took the pictures, and then but the reception in the country club was pretty uneventful. It went off pretty well, and then the two went off on their honeymoon to Hawaii. Now, do you want me to go ahead and?
Yes. Tell us about the honeymoon, because it gets better.
Okay, they're on their honeymoon in Hawaii, and Beth Lamb is at home, and her phone rings, and she says, hello, and it's Rebecca on her honeymoon. She says, oh my God, Beth, you can't believe it. This is horrible. And she's telling how poor Bruce is totally incapable of doing what he's supposed to do. He doesn't know how. He doesn't know anything about how to please a woman or what to do with a woman. And oh my God, this woman is calling this Mormon mom wedding photographer to complain about her honeymoon.
Incredible.
And she, Rebecca told several other people. She told her own sister. When she got back, she even called Ed Brown, the brother-in-law, with whom she had never had a one-on-one conversation, and was complaining about Bruce's incapable performance. And Ed Brown, the brother-in-law, told her, look, what are you doing telling me this garbage? You need to talk to someone else. This is not my business, for heaven's sake. And it stunned him that this woman was spreading these kind of malicious comments about her poor new husband. Right.
And what happened after they got back to the States after this honeymoon? How did Rebecca proceed with Bruce? What was her? We know what her complaint was about the honeymoon, but how did she proceed from there? What happened between the two?
Well, when she got back, they did move into the house for a while, and poor Bruce is trying to do his best, but he's beginning to think, oh my God, this is awful. What's going on? And Rebecca is really cold to him. She's spreading these nasty rumors, And then she begins to say, I want a divorce. This isn't working out. I want a divorce. And Bruce is brokenhearted. And within just a few weeks, she kicks him out. And he moved back down with his parents, just stunned and horrified that this woman doesn't want him. Meanwhile, she's having parties up there and inviting her male friends. Her stripper friend is coming out spending nights now. And poor Bruce doesn't know what to do. And so he finally, at Ed Brown, his brother-in-law's advice, sees a lawyer to talk about it. And the lawyer gives Bruce some pretty good news. He says, the divorce laws, she won't get very much from you because you acquired all that before you were married to her, and the divorce laws don't require you to split that with her. And so she'll pick up maybe $3,000 or $4,000. Well, when Rebecca hears this, she changes her tone entirely. She suddenly doesn't want this divorce, but she begins a new strategy. She begins spreading the word among everyone who will listen for 5 minutes that Bruce has been molesting her little boy sexually. And now everyone who knows him is just horrified, including Bertha. Bertha at first said, "Are you kidding me? Are you telling me that he was actually molesting him?" And she tries to rationalize. Maybe he was just holding him on his lap or something and doesn't know how to treat little boys. No, I saw him and he complained. My little boy complained that he molested him. And Bertha realizes this is just a scam. All she's doing now is angling to get his money via another route than divorce.
Did she tell anybody else the molestation accusation as well?
She told the wedding photographer also, Beth, and she told everyone who would listen, including her sisters. And the sister didn't believe it. She just called her an outright liar. But Rebecca wanted to proceed with this.
Did this molestation accusation get back to his family as well?
I don't know if it ever got to his parents. I hope not, because that would have devastated them. But Bertha asked, well, have you called the police? Have you called anyone? You need counseling. You need police help on this. Oh, no. I don't want to do that because that wouldn't work. But then she came up with an additional accusation. That Uncle Arturo had been visiting, and that Bruce had propositioned him for sort of a homosexual act, and that now Rebecca is spreading the word that now there may be retribution. My uncle, in a Hispanic family, you do not make that kind of a proposition to men. I'm afraid my cousins might do something to him. So she was already laying some groundwork
in retrospect, when people think about it, she was laying some groundwork for any kind of sympathy for Bruce to be gone, and also laying the groundwork for possibly any kind of talk of assault as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah. She's laying groundwork, and that's what she's heading for.
Now, when she realizes she can't make any money from this divorce, how does she proceed with Bruce? What does she do? Is she still on a spending spree? Does he cancel any credit cards? How does he proceed? How does she proceed? And what time frame are we talking about after he's booted out of the house?
Well, it's just a few weeks after he's booted out of the house now, and she's still using the credit cards extravagantly, and her stripper boyfriend is having a tough time making meeting his expenses, so she's feeding him money as well out of Bruce's accounts. And this is when Bertha becomes more estranged finally from Rebecca. This is just unfair, because she liked Bruce and she didn't believe any of the stories about him. But she told him, you should stop that. That's not very good. Well, how am I going to live? And so she's spending it rapidly. Now, finally, Ed Brown counsels Bruce and says, look, you got to stop that spending spree. And so finally, Bruce kills some of the credit cards, so she can't keep doing that to him.
Right. Now, I guess to Bruce's surprise, he gets a call from Rebecca. Does Rebecca give him a call about talking about their future? When does this happen, and who makes the call, and what's Bruce's reaction?
Yeah, Bruce is at his folks and he's just working every day, coming home and going into his bedroom every night, just mourning and feeling awful. And he gets a call one night, and it's Rebecca, and she says, maybe we should make up. Maybe we should get back together. It would be really nice. And they had often eaten at a Mexican food restaurant in Boyle Heights, which is East Los Angeles. And so how about a date? How about we go there and have a couple of drinks and a nice Mexican dinner, and let's get back together. We can repair our marriage. Oh, Bruce is absolutely elated. He just, he's so thrilled and happy. And he tells his mom and dad, and they're dubious, but they say, well, okay, maybe that's for the best. So they take off to go somewhere one night, and Rebecca shows up. I don't think I mentioned earlier that Bruce also bought her a new SUV.
Right.
So she shows up in the SUV, and Bruce gets in. He's the passenger, and they drive to Boyle Heights and go to their Mexican food restaurant. And Rebecca, during the meal, gets up 2 or 3 times. First, she goes back, and the waitress spots her making a call from the payphone, and then, but that lasted only briefly. And then spots her 2 other times hiding down a hallway making cell phone calls. And then they leave the restaurant.
Now she takes. They had also visited someone else that evening, which was again in retrospect kind of unusual, or at least they find out about it and they investigate this meeting. Who did they go and spend some time with that evening that seemed a little unusual to police later?
It actually happened after the restaurant. They left the restaurant and drove over to Uncle Arturo's little shambles of a house where he had raised Alvaro and Jose and three daughters as well. His wife, by the way, had left him years earlier and lived in another county because of his groping of other women.
Yeah.
And, so they go to Uncle Arturo's house, and his Uncle Arturo's there with his girlfriend. And Bruce and Rebecca they bring him actually food from the restaurant, too.
Nice.
And then they have several more drinks. They've had a few at the restaurant, and they have a few more. And poor Bruce, by this time, is pretty well snockered. He's had more than he can handle, and he's weaving around. And they stay at Uncle Alvaro's house until, pretty close to 1 o'clock in the morning. And then they say, well, we've got to get on home, back up to Whittier. So they drive out, and she takes a little different route than she normally takes to go to Whittier. Right,
and then what happens? Something with the vehicle.
By the way, I don't think I mentioned earlier that Alvaro, her cousin Alvaro, also became a male stripper. In being up at the house often, after Bruce was kicked out, he pretty much moved in, too, up at the house. And he became a male stripper, a client of Rebecca's lover. And so now he's involved. But now Rebecca and Bruce drive out in the SUV, and she takes a little alternate route and makes a right turn into a residential section. And Rebecca says, "Oh my gosh!" She says, "The red light's on the dashboard. That means the back hatch is open." She pulls over into this dark residential street, and steps outside allegedly to close that. And all of a sudden, a gunman steps out from the dark bushes beside them, and it's after 1 a.m. and opens fire. He shoots Bruce, and one bullet pierces his mouth, his cheek, and goes out one side. But that's not a lethal shot. And poor Bruce, absolutely stunned, horrified, in terrible pain, manages to scramble out of the car and start to run across the street. But the gunman is behind him and shoots him 2 or 3 more times, and Bruce makes it across and collapses. Then the gunman delivers a final shot into Bruce's head and then runs off down the street and turns the corner and disappears.
Now, in your book, you have a woman named Virginia Silva, and she becomes a very important character later. She doesn't make a phone call, but she does witness something. What does she see that evening based on that? She must have heard shots. What does she witness?
Virginia lives just across the street from where the car was parked. They parked by some brush that is actually next to an entrance to the Santa Ana Freeway. But Virginia lives across the street in a row of houses, and at about a little after 1 in the morning, she had just gone to sleep. She heard this blast outside. She jumps out of bed and runs downstairs and looks out through her bay window, and she sees the dark-clad gunman chasing Bruce across the street and shooting at him. And then sees the the gunman disappear down the street. And poor Virginia is horrified, but within just moments, she sees police start arriving in ambulances. And so she said, well, there's no point in me calling 911. As it happened, the gunman ran about 2 blocks downhill after he turned left, and another witness, another Hispanic woman, saw him running along that sidewalk and was suspicious, and she called 911 because she had also heard gunshots up the street and saw a man running. So she called 911, and the police and the ambulances arrived just moments afterwards.
Now, what did they find at the scene? Again, they make assessments very early on based on their vast experience with these kinds of cases. What did they see, and what did they initially think was unusual for, and what did they think this crime was? And what happened when they talked to Rebecca about this as well?
Well, the first witness who saw it from her bay window spotted Bruce lying face down in a driveway with blood pouring. She couldn't see the blood, but blood was pouring out of him. And she also spotted a female figure behind the SUV, also prostrate on the pavement. And it looked like 2 people had been shot to death. The police arrive. And just as they arrive, Rebecca rises up from her spot on the pavement where she'd been lying down, oddly with her head cupped in her hands and her shoes placed very neatly behind the wheel as if she'd placed them in a closet. And she gets up and says, oh my God, they were carjackers. And they hit me on my head and knocked me out. And I don't know. And they took my rings. They took my expensive rings. And she's just carrying on having a fit. And the police, the paramedics examine Bruce and find that he's beyond any help. Then they examine Rebecca. And they find no scratches, no bumps, no indication of being slugged, even though she's complaining she was knocked out by these carjackers. The police arrive and detectives arrive, and they wonder why carjackers would shoot this man and leave that car, that brand new car sitting there, running with the engine running, and her purse sitting in the middle of the seat. Carjackers don't do that, but they don't have any real evidence that she's lying, so they pretty much accept her story and start investigation. And then they talk to the witness down the street, who also speaks of seeing the dark-clad men running down the street, and she thought she heard a car door slam and a car drive away a few feet away from her house. Right.
Now, we don't have that much time. We've got 11 minutes, so what I'm going to do is that I want to go backwards a little bit to another important figure, which is a LAPD officer named Robert. This is a pseudonym you use for him, but Robert Zavala, and that there was some relationship with Alvaro, and maybe tell us a little bit about his relationship to this story, and, well, because it's very important right after this turn of events here.
Well, the cousin Alvaro had been working at the YMCA in Boyle Heights in East L.A., and in doing that, he met a police officer who came in once in a while. We call him Zavala in the story, and he actually asked if he could get some information about becoming a policeman. Alvaro wanted to become a policeman.
Right.
And then they all, after Bruce was kicked out of the house, they all took that SUV and pulled the boat over to Lake Havasu, including the police officer, Alvaro, Rebecca, and a couple other people went over to have a few days at the lake. Now, she's kind of hinting that she'd like to have an affair with this police officer. Well, she's also talking about maybe then her next target would be one of the greatest boxers in Southern California history. I won't even name him right now because.
Right.
But anyway, she has she's targeting new men already before the murder. And then Zavala gets a strange call early in the morning and wakes him up after 1 o'clock on the morning of the murder, and it's Alvaro. And he first, at one call, he says, I'm over here and I'm all distraught because my girlfriend's breaking up with me. Well, why are you calling me? Well, I just need someone to talk to. And then a little while later he calls, oh, my God, I just heard that Bruce was shot. Bruce was shot and killed. now Zavala is really wondering what's going on. So
sure.
he goes in and tells the detective who's assigned this case about all this, and this begins to open things up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you want me to proceed with, we're getting close, short of time. You want me to step one step forward and tell?
Yeah, go ahead. Just continue continue with the story.
Okay, well, we've talked about Beth Lamb, the Mormon mom, wedding photographer.
Right.
Now, Rebecca is supposed to be grieving over her dead husband, but she calls Beth and says, "Oh, we need a whole bunch of pictures for the funeral, and we need a videotape." Oh my goodness! And so Beth goes up and makes an appointment to talk about which pictures she wants from the wedding and what to do now. And Beth spots these beautiful rings on Rebecca's hands. And then she hears later, when she's in question, she hears that the rings were stolen when the carjacker hit them. And
right.
my God, she thinks, wait a minute, this woman is lying. She had those rings in her hand. And she struggles for a couple of days, and what am I going to do? And she calls a police officer friend of hers, and he said, "You call that detective right now, and you tell him." So she did. And this is actually the turning point in the whole case. The Mormon mom wedding photographer's information helps get this case opened up and solved.
What did the police ask Elizabeth Lamb to do?
They asked her if she'd wear a wire and go to the house and see if she could get Rebecca to talk. And Elizabeth was scared to death. She didn't want to, but she did. She was very courageous, and she tried. But no interesting information developed out of that. But because the rings were obvious, the officers asked her, "Could you go up there and make sure she's there, because we're going to do a raid?" And Elizabeth helps him. But she chooses not to be in the house when the search warrant arrives, and they go into the house and to search and see what they can find when they have a search warrant. And Rebecca's sitting on her hands. "Rebecca, could we see your hands, please?" And she very shyly and reluctantly holds out her hands, and there that beautiful glowing diamond ring that had been stolen. Okay, now she's lying. And so, with a little bit more information beyond that, she is arrested. And by this time, they have also began a unique, brand new forensic study, and that's the use of cell phones. A lot of people don't realize that cell phones can tell what your location was, and those records of your calls and the calls you received are on record somewhere. And
sure.
Any given date that you use your cell phone, you can be traced within a few hundred yards where you were. Well, as it turns out, Alvaro was very, very close to the murder scene when it happened. And the cell phone records also connected those strange calls that Rebecca was making from the restaurant to Alvaro. And she and Alvaro exchanged dozens of calls just leading up to and right after the murder.
So basically, police didn't, not to say they didn't have a hard job, but it was fairly easy based on the interviews with her friends, those phone records, like you say, they were able to pinpoint that Alvaro had made the call very close. They also, for our audience that doesn't know it, it's pretty simple why they wanted to have a police officer. They wanted to know if they could get any information about the investigation. They wanted to have an ally, they figured, in the police force. Didn't really work out that way. Not the smartest of criminals. So anyway, we'll just leave it at that, because it's the trial. The story has more twists and turns, and it's an incredible trial itself too. So
the final twist was that the witness down the street who saw the dark-clad figure running was able to identify Jose, the other Alvaro's brother, as the shooter, and so right. that witness identification pinned him, and they all went to trial, and it took 3 trials to settle this case finally.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, we'll have to leave it for our audience to want to read this book, and because it looks like an incredible slam dunk at the beginning of the trial, but not with 3 trials, that's for sure.
Well, let's hope we leave some mystery for the readers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it's a great book, Don. I also wanted to talk about one of the new projects you're working on right now, and I wanted to tell people, how many books have you written so far in your, you said 15-year career so far? How many books have you written?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. This book was number 18. I've just finished number 19, and I just in August I went to the trial for the one I'm beginning to work on right now, which will be number 20. All of these but one were true crime books.
Wow. What is the new case you're working on? Can you tell us about that, or who it's involved with?
Yeah, this is a case of a New York lawyer who moved to Hollywood and wanted to immerse himself in the lifestyle, and he did, into pornography, drugs, strippers, and wound up killing a young woman with whom he became involved here with a little clumsy game of Russian roulette.
Wow.
Dumped her body out in the desert.
Do you have a working title for this book?
Well, we're calling it the one I just finished. We just titled it "Deadly Deceit." That's about a man who murdered his own parents in Arizona and used their money to take his 15-year-old girlfriend to Hawaii.
Oh, incredible!
The one I'm starting to work on right now is called "Homicide in the Hollywood Hills."
Wow, great title. So, "Deadly Deceit." When did that come out?
It will come out. I just finished it.
Oh, pardon me.
It's in the process of publication now. Will probably come out a little bit later this year or early next year.
Is that another title with Kensington?
It is with Kensington, and that's Deadly Deceit.
Deadly Deceit. Oh, that's great. And so, what made you start to write true crime? I don't know if we'd actually talked about it on the show last time when we did Die for Me, but what compelled you to become involved with this true crime genre?
Well, that's what I read, and I had a 30-year career with the phone company and spent 5 years after that just traveling the world, and I thought, I got some time. I should be doing something else, and so I thought, I'll write a book. Well, I'd always read true crime books, and I'd always had a deadly horror of being locked up. I'm a little claustrophobic, and being locked up, it just gives me the shivers, so I read several books about people in life in prison. And so when I decided, what shall I do next? I think I'll write a true crime book. And so that's what got that started. It's been a great second career, I'll tell you. It's great fun.
Absolutely. And at what point did you take a foray into fiction?
I've not written any fiction. These are all nonfiction books. Every book of mine, and including the other one, which is not true crime. That was about World War II men shot down in France and rescued through the French underground.
And what was the name of that book?
That's called Their Deeds of Valor, and that one comes from my heart. I love doing that one because I got to go interview scores of men who actually flew those B-17s and P-51s and were shot down or crash landed in France.
Wow, so actually,
I went to France as well and interviewed some of the French underground people, which was great fun. Yeah,
absolutely. And you say you decided you'd always read true crime. What are some of the authors that were influences for you?
It's interesting. Of course, Truman Capote was in Cold Blood was he's the pioneer, and then the second one was Onion Field by Joe Wambaugh. And right now, I just finished reading Wambaugh's. I think it's about his 18th or 20th book, and it ties in so nicely with my Homicide in the Hollywood Hills. He even mentions a detective whom I interviewed a few weeks ago, and is acknowledged in his book. So it's going to tie in wonderfully with Wambaugh's works, who was one of my idols when I began writing.
Wow. It's also interesting as well because I interviewed Philip Carlo, another Pinnacle author, Kensington author, about the Night Stalker, and Bertha's family was involved with the capture of Richard Ramirez in that neighborhood when he was running from the law.
That's right. I was amazed when I interviewed her, and she told me that her friends were those Hispanic people who chased Ramirez down and captured him.
It was just incredible, too, that story where Ramirez comes back into Los Angeles and his face is all over the newspapers, and the Hispanic people are saying El Matador as he's running away, saying the killer, you know. So,
yeah, right.
Yeah, incredible.
Ron and I actually retraced the route he ran that day and stopped at that little store where he saw the newspaper with his picture on the front, and I have my picture taken at that same newsstand.
Wow, incredible. Yeah, well, I just really want to thank you very much, Don, for coming back on the program, and with this second book that we've talked about, I guess we'll have to talk about a lot more than that with you're on your 20th right now, so I want to thank you very much for coming on and talking about your great book, Honeymoon with a Killer. Great story, and thank you very much for the interview, Don.
My pleasure, Dan. Thanks so much. I'll be looking forward to talking to you on the next one.
Okay, Don, have yourself a good evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
You've been listening to the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them, with my special guest, Don Lasseter, with Ronald E. Bowers. That's Honeymoon with a Killer on Kensington. Pinnacle is the true crime imprint. Have yourselves a good evening. Good night.